Here we go, guys. So who here got to Tony? Anybody got to Tony? Wish him a happy birthday? Anybody? You guys, you got me? Got one guy. Guys, there's others? Keep up. If you said it once, you got to say it 3 times. We're trying to do a little thing on Tony because he never tells us. We always forget when it is, and he tells us a month later, he's like, you missed my birthday. So we're trying to be a little more extra this year with him. So please help me out. Tony Lou, wish him a happy birthday. Thank you. Hey, we're going to go back on the program here. Thanks for coming back. We want to just jump right into the TED Talk and get started. Let me introduce Ankur. He's a CEO and founder, and he also worked at, CEO and founder of Impera. I apologize. He also worked at a smaller company called Microsoft, but he also got his degree from Carnegie Mellon, so he's a very smart individual. We'd love to bring to the stage. Is he even here? There he is. There you go. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. There should be a spot for your water. It's down. It's the hard part.
It's down?
Down is forward.
Okay. See what I can do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Okay. So nice to meet you all. My name is Ankur. I'm the founder and CEO of Impera, and we're a company that helps other companies use machine learning to automate and analyze data and documents. So we help more than 10,000 customers do stuff like automate the underwriting process, automate claims management, automate invoice processing, automate customer service requests, just all kinds of crazy stuff. And insurance is a really big area of focus for us, especially because there are some really mundane parts in the claims process and the underwriting process specifically. And this talk is not going to be too much about Impera. It's more just thinking about the future. And as an AI company, we do spend a lot of time thinking about the future and AI's role in it and our role in that. So let's set the stage for the future. It's 2032. Are we living in the Matrix? Are there self-driving cars? What's going on? So let's start with self-driving cars. Cruise was founded in 2013, and it was one of the first companies to really set off the self-driving revolution. I live in San Francisco, so I see some of their cars floating around, but it's still not really in production yet. I think by 2032, though, we will have self-driving cars. They will be in production, and it'll be thanks to AI technology, but also better city planning and road engineering, which a lot of cities are working on right now. So another question is, are we going to talk to customer service bots, or are we going to talk to people when we have questions? And by 2032, conversational AI will be good enough so that by default, you're going to talk to some kind of customer service bot, if at all. But at the same time, the underlying technology is going to get better too. United will have a better app, so hopefully you don't have to call them and complain as much as you do. Planes are getting faster, trains are getting faster, logistics are getting better, and so a lot of the customer service requests that we have today hopefully don't exist in the first place. And then an issue I think that's probably near and dear to our hearts in this room especially are things like lost run reports, accord forms, invoices, are they still floating around? And I think the answer is no, or at least a human isn't going to be looking at them. By 2032, computer vision and NLP technology, which is already good but getting better every day, will be mature enough so that people don't have to handle paperwork on a day-to-day basis. However, there will be a lot of standardization too, and maybe you don't need to generate a PDF file for a lost run report or fill out an accord form because you have lots of great IoT data that answers the same questions in the first place. So I think there's some common threads here that are worth thinking about. The first is that AI will become the default for a lot of things that have humans in the loop today. For example, we're the first line of defense for a vast majority of tasks in customer experience and data entry, just because AI isn't good enough yet and it's not deployed widely enough yet. So by 2032, I think we'll be off the critical path to a large extent. However, AI will still need human input when things go awry. Why? and I know this has been a topic of significant debate recently. If people are following the Google stuff, for example. So this is subjective to some extent, but modern AI is really good at perception and not reasoning. One way I think about it, for those that maybe have been following the NBA finals, which just ended, there are a lot of sports people in the media that watch the games and then try to explain what players are thinking about. And that's actually a pretty good model for what the capabilities of AI are in the first place. It's able to watch stuff and explain it, but it'll never really be the player on the court that's figuring things out in the first place. And the last thing, which I think about a lot, is that AI is really a tool to allow you to iteratively make things better. So big, ambitious technology innovation is actually often at odds with AI. Self-driving cars would be a solved problem by now if roads were designed to support them in the first place. United wouldn't need so many customer service reps if their airline, got in on time in the first place and their app didn't suck. Sorry if anyone works there. I had a really bad experience on my honeymoon a month ago. And again, you don't there are all these questions on Accord forms. Maybe you don't need to answer them in the first place if you have IoT sensors and other incredible data sources that can answer a lot of these questions to begin with. And so these things are sometimes at odds. Another question I think about is if you call on the phone to buy something, and you have to read your credit card number over the phone, should that be solved by AI or should it be solved by Apple Pay? Well, which solution is actually better? So all three of these use cases at their core are really about communication. And right now, there are things we communicate with each other through documents as businesses or peers on the phone or even drivers as we're driving around, sometimes passive aggressively. These things are hard to automate because standardization is really, 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 really hard. And I probably don't need to convince anyone in this room of how hard standardization is. And unfortunately, when standardization doesn't exist, we're left communicating our credit card numbers on the phone or emailing each other Accord forms or lost run reports to try to get our work done. So historically, information that we communicate requires data entry. And I actually think this is a really great application, and certainly our North Star at Impera is thinking about how AI can solve the data entry problem. Some forms of data entry are very, very obvious. For example, typing an Accord form submission into 5 different policy management systems. That's obvious and painful. Some of them are more abstract, like doing sentiment analysis or doing data entry on a steering wheel to drive your car. I think a good framework is you're doing data entry in 2022 if you're sitting at your computer or in your car and thinking, why am I doing this? I shouldn't have to do it. And again, at Impera, we really think about the data entry problem today with respect to things like documents, but we have very big ambitions for the future to think about the overall scope of the problem and the new problems that will arise in the future. Okay, so now let's keep thinking about the future, and let's say data entry is automated. Where does that leave us? What are we doing? Well, I think every year, iteratively, we'll be doing less and less data entry. And that means less punching data from Accord forms and more time thinking about how to build a better user experience or how to actually analyze the data. Some people were talking about that earlier, like how do I actually make use of the data in the first place? I actually can't think of a single customer of ours, Jason works with me, correct me if I'm wrong, who actually hires people specifically to do data entry. All of our customers, where people are doing a lot of data entry, they're actually really smart, creative professionals, and that's the worst part of their job. They actually want to be doing that other stuff. And so, yes, I think there will be less data entry work to do, but I don't think, at least in this industry, that's going to put a lot of people out of jobs. Instead, I think it's going to result in more time to, build better user experiences, make smarter decisions with data, and so on. So, by no means this slide we removed. There we go. By no means do I think that every job is safe. I think eventually Uber drivers, some folks in customer service, data entry professionals, and so on are going to have to find something else to do. And I don't have all the answers here, but I can share some anecdotes about what we've seen at Impera. A company with 10 very overloaded operations people might sign up for our product online, implement it for 1 or 2 use cases, and start saving a bunch of time. And what we've seen is there's a mentality shift among these folks to sort of elevate themselves from doing back office data entry to try to make a deadline into being the professionals on their team who are actually able to help their businesses scale more efficiently. And so we're very excited about basically enabling and upskilling people to be the forces that can drive their companies to be more efficient. And finally, tying it all together, we now live in a world where AI can solve this data entry problem. The types of data we're going to automate will change over time, but the factor that drives it, I think, is always going to be the same, which is a lack of standardization. AI is a way of of allowing technology to function where standardization has not caught up or may not even be possible in the first place. And I think that's always going to be the case because we are human after all. That's it.
Thank you very much. Great, appreciate that. It's very insightful, thank you. With that said, moving on to our next panel. Predicting longevity, AI versus the human factors using IoT. This was very interesting. We have our panel here. As I call your name, please come on up. Robert, he's the Chief Data Scientist for Prudential's US business and has about 20 years experience as a data science and advanced analytics leader. We have Fred, he's the SVP and Chief Pricing Officer at Legal & General America. Fred has worked at some of the world's largest insurance companies, consulting firms, and global reinsurance carriers. And Jolie is the head of life and health underwriting and medical reimbursement at Swiss Re, with responsibility of helping clients' profitability grow with their medical portfolio. And of course, our moderator, David. If you don't know David, you should. He's a co-founder of InsurTech New York, and you got to at least say hello to David today. Thank you. Do you want to get Fred? Right, there you go.
All right, Roy. Thanks for welcoming me to the last panel, and hopefully we can make this an energetic one to keep you guys awake to the rest of the evening. So since I'm last, I have the fortunate opportunity to summarize some of the interesting things that we've learned today from the other panels and hopefully tie it back into what we're going to be talking about on this panel, which is about longevity. So you heard in the first panel from Meredith that AI really shouldn't be focusing on the most interesting things, but the most boring applications are the best ones. So for those of you that are really looking for an interesting career, you might as well look a little bit past AI. The second thing that we learned is context is important. We heard from Rick that if you don't put context in AI, you might end up pulverizing rats instead of pulverizing rat DNA. So definitely make sure you put your context in before you start building your architectural models. And most recently, we learned from Ankur that if United would just get their flights in on time, then we wouldn't need to use AI in the customer service model. So revert back to Meredith, do the boring things first, get your people to the airport on time. So this panel really hopefully should look forward at the next piece, right? So the next piece is about predicting the future. And what better way to predict the future in our industry than to think about longevity? How long are people going to live? And not just your average everyday actuarial model, but thinking about the people that do skydiving, the people that do rock climbing, and more practically, people that have diabetes. So I think in today's world, we need to think about that. And I have three really wonderful panelists that are going to help us think about that. So Jolie, I want you to really kick us off. And the first topic that we're going to talk about is where we are today. And if you think back 20 years ago, do you think that we could have predicted COVID, the rise of diabetes, the unaffordability of insulin, and that actually our life expectancy has gone down? So how do you feel that we're doing compared to 20 years ago in terms of projecting longevity?
Here we go. In terms of predicting longevity, we were doing really well until COVID hit. And COVID was a game changer because no one expected what happened to mortality, especially in the US. If you look outside the US, not nearly as impactful, by the way. It's really very much in the US. And at the same time, we had this explosion of data that was used and is being used in the underwriting process. Everything from your wearable data to your electronic health records, clinical health data, all of that is now changing the way we look at longevity. And the fact is, we're not in a great position right now to assess how all of those new ways of assessing risk will impact our mortality assumptions. And that's because those of you that are actuaries in the audience know that we lack the longitudinal data sets to really prove whether or not these new data sources will hold true from a mortality projection assumption. So doing really well until we hit recently.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's an important thing, right? So if we go back to that context discussion, it's important to know where are we, right? We're in a post-COVID world. And that's helpful in some sense, but it's also not helpful in other sense. So I think really, Fred, I'd love to hear your perspective on another place where it wasn't because of COVID, but because of kind of the own industries, maybe a little bit of arrogance where we didn't really hit the mark as well, which was in long-term care. We originally thought it might cost something and it cost a lot different. So curious your perspective on what might have led to long-term care not predicting the current costs, and are there other ticking time bombs that we have in other lines of long-term life insurance business?
Yeah, so, actuaries, when they first started pricing long-term carers, they were still using approaches that were based on point estimates. They weren't even using stochastic models. They were not using stochastic on stochastic, and they certainly weren't using machine learning models to kind of do anything that would predict the future. So, in order to use point estimate models to get long-term care pricing right, you have to guess incidence rate right, utilization rates right, investment rates, reinvestment rates, inflation right, medical inflation right, medical advances right. You actually, and that's the stuff that you can kind of look backwards on to try to make some assumptions going forward. Then there's the unknowns, things like you have to try to predict anti-aging and all the advances being made there. Regenerative medicine as well. These are drivers of mortality improvement going forward. So if you can't get that assumption right, you also won't get it right. So, and if you can get all of these things right, you shouldn't actually be a pricing actuary. You should be making money doing something else. So, that's one of the key reasons, like part of the arrogance of the actuaries trying to think that, using point estimate models, they could predict all this stuff with long-term guarantees, with benefits, as opposed to reimbursements, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that they got wrong, but it was because they were coming from an era that was predictable. Like for decades, these assumptions followed a stationary pattern, and they were using the stationary assumption to kind of predict that, whatever held in the past is going to continue to hold in the future, and that stopped being true. And it's certainly not true today anymore, where the world is changing as fast as we can see. So just to give you a couple of examples, things like anti-aging, people might think that's still science fiction, but there's already drugs out there that have been proven to kind of extend life, things like rapamycin, things like metformin, and even things like caloric restriction. Those things, again, if actuaries try to look at the past, to look at the behavior of people before baby boomers and how they're entering into long-term care facilities and look at the utilizations in the past, they're going to get it wrong going forward because the behavior of those people is going to be very different than the ones that we have data on. So we got to be very careful with that. Regenerative medicine as well. It might sound like science fiction, but there's already out there 3D printing of muscle tissue that are based on your own DNA, and they're working on 3D printing of organs. So organ replacement is going to become a lot more common in the future. And if you have people in long-term care, again, the utilization rate, if we can just keep them alive, they continue to use, and who knows what's going to happen there. So all of these things are extremely difficult to predict, and to try to get all of these assumptions right now, even if you use stochastic, unstochastic, or other approaches, is extremely difficult. So doing like guarantee products that for more than 20 years is very, very, very risky. Just a quick example, Equitable Life in the UK, on the annuity business, they just got two assumptions wrong. Longevity or mortality improvement and investment. They got those two wrong and they went insolvent. So, imagine when you're trying to do a lot more than just two assumptions. And so that's where we're at. Yep.
Yeah, no, so it sounds like, Fred, that if all these great things come true, I want to sit and look at your presentation, not Encore's, about the 2032, and take my rapamycin and mitochondrial repairs, so then I can live past my term and not have to worry about the long-term investments in life insurance. But that being said, we have a lot to work on in terms of getting our data to work. So maybe that gives Robert a chance to talk about some of the data science aspects of it, because if we have all of these different data sources that we need to integrate, how do we make our systems actually data science friendly so we can take all of the data that Fred wants and put it to use?
Thanks. So really, before you can build a single model and productionize a single model, you need to have a data ecosystem that supports the data science modeling process. And eventually, you need to be able to build pipelines that are reusable. So one of our biggest challenges as an industry is that we rely on admin platforms. And those admin platforms, there's not a single one in the individual life insurance industry that actually snapshots the data. So you know what happens today, you don't know what happened yesterday. So that then places the emphasis, the burden on the insurer to actually create those systems. And that's exactly what we've had to do. So before you start any sort of advanced modeling program, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to create an analytic data warehouse or data environment where you're pulling in data from all of the sources that you need to predict longevity or mortality. So we've had a program for the last 6 years where we've been using machine learning models to predict mortality, and we've been using that to underwrite risk. So essentially, you can come in, for a term insurance application, you can be underwritten either instantly or in a matter of days versus the traditional process. But before we could get there, we had to take data from our admin platform, our third-party data sources. So there are prescription histories, there are medical billing records, there is all of the data from the application. And these applications were not designed for machine learning. So one of our big challenges was taking an application where you have free-form text, for example, and then you actually have to use natural language processing to extract conditions. And so it's been a very painstaking process where we've had to go condition by condition and subcondition, and we've had to actually be able to transform the data that we get into data that's usable and to create time series of that data to be able to build models. So the first thing that we really need to do as an industry is, in order to be able to do any type of AI modeling, we need to first get our data in order, and that's having consistent records for the customer and for the policyholder, and following that policyholder through from the time that they apply for insurance all the way through their entire lifespan. And if we solve that problem, it makes my job in data science significantly easier, because we can focus on just building a very good model with data that's already been cleaned and normalized. So I would say that as an industry, we are, I've also come from banking, so the banks are far ahead of us. I mean, they've done a lot better job. If you look at financial transactions, I mean, you can go down to the microsecond on bid and ask. And in the insurance industry, we're still working to get snapshots of the previous day's book of records. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I think we have made progress, and we're definitely to the point where we're starting to be able to generate some really interesting models.
Yeah, so it definitely feels like there's a lot of work before you to make it easy to actually manipulate the data and produce some real results. So for the rest of our panel, there's kind of two worlds we're going to look at. One is the opportunity challenges of AI to improve longevity, and the other is what else is out there, right? So thinking about IoT, collecting data from individuals, whether it's using a Fitbit or some other technology that monitors individuals, and which one is a better outcome, and maybe at the end we'll have an idea of where we can spend our time. So I think, Fred, let's talk first about some of the opportunities to use AI. And I think one area that Robert mentioned is that there's work that needs to be done up front. So do you think that machine learning and natural language processing is ready to take the data that Robert wants to have and get it ready for him? Or is there more work that has to be happening in the standardization ahead of that?
No, I think the short answer is it's ready, but let me give you the long answer now. First of all, you got to break it down into two different categories of longevity models. Like there's carriers who take longevity risk by selling annuities. That's limited input in terms of underwriting. They do very limited underwriting, and they usually just have age and gender, maybe the type of industry they're in, and that's about it. Then you have the life settlement industry who's actually buying policies and holding on to them until the person dies. That's another way of taking longevity risk. And they do a lot more underwriting. So they actually go out and collect APSs, they can collect EHR, so on and so forth. So what I've seen and I've worked on is AI models, ML models that have advanced quite a bit in that arena. And what I mean by that is you could use AI and LP to first of all extract information. So you've heard previous panels talk about that a lot of work has been done and a lot of work continues to be done to just extract the relevant information out of the attending physician statements as well as electronic health records. So there's already been some progress that we could use, and there's more to come there for sure. Then you also need to collect hundreds of millions of records. There is structured data out there if you can find it. And you can actually develop much better comorbidity models than traditional carriers have used in the past. So typically, mortality longevity can be driven by, you can condense it down to about 2,000 different impairments. A typical underwriting manual that's been developed in the past by reinsurers and carriers relies on about 300 impairments. 300 impairments is about as much as a human underwriter can handle in their head. If you actually want to develop comorbidities between 2,000 different impairments, you need a machine. A machine can be much better at doing that than a human underwriter. So that's where, again, I've seen a lot of advancement. There is actually work that's been done and implemented out there in the life settlement world. And again, there's a lot more coming. I think that's going to continue to make things better.
Yeah, so it sounds like if there's a lot at stake, like you're going to buy a book of life settlement business and you have time to spend, AI is going to help you go from 300 data points to 2,000 plus, and there's a real yield there. But maybe in some of the shorter term, on the fly type of calculations, it's not quite ready yet.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So let's switch for a moment to the challenges, because I know there's been a lot in the news recently thinking about privacy, and who else holds more data than your life insurers? So, Jolie, my question for you is really about the proxy discrimination and the concept that really regulators will eventually hamper our ability to use the data that we need to use to ultimately predict longevity. So my kind of overall thought is it's happening, but do you think that it's happening at the point that we can keep up, or do you think that it will eventually destabilize the market?
It is very real right now. I mean, we have quite a few discussions with regulators on the topic. It's coming more and more, and it's not just in the US, it's also other parts of the globe where this is becoming a hot topic, because there are concerns that it could disproportionately impact certain classes of people, that they will be impacted adversely, have to pay higher premiums, be discriminated against. And so the challenge is, especially when we don't collect that sort of identifiable information, how we prove the negative, essentially, which is there isn't proxy discrimination. So it's really important that everyone start to think about it. What is your framework to show when a regulator comes to you to say, how are you mitigating against this risk? So have a framework, have an analysis, and be on the front foot. That's something as an industry that we're starting to talk more and more about, because the opportunities for the use of AI in a productive manner are so immense. So why do I say that? The reason I say that is because right now, to me, the secret in insurance is that we're fighting over the same standard and preferred lives to insure. So we have to expand that pie. And the reason and the way we can do that is through AI if we make it easier for people to procure insurance. And that's through the use of data, because we know there are 3 reasons why around 40 to 50% of people fall out of the underwriting process. 1, they assume they won't qualify because they have some sort of health condition. 2, they assume even if they do qualify, it's going to be cost prohibitive. And 3, it's just too time consuming to get the medicals done and whatnot. So if we can use all of this alternative data to accelerate the process and reach other people so they don't fall out of that, that's a huge win, not only for our industry, but also for the consumers, because I'll put in my little plug for history. We make the world more resilient. That's what is in our DNA. That's what we want to do. We want to reach more people. And the only way I think to do that is through the use of alternative data. And then to your point, using AI, although I don't think we're fully going to ever automate, my underwriters would throw a fit if they thought that I was saying that we could automate the underwriting process completely. I think we'll always need a human underwriter, but there's an opportunity here that we have to capture.
Yeah, so it seems like we definitely, as an industry, have to push back against some of the politicians, because if we can make the pie bigger, it's going to help our industry and it's going to help people be more resilient. But I think that almost feeds into the next challenge, right? Like, we're talking about politics, and somehow politicians have a better job, an easier job at recruiting the young people to work for them than our industry does. So maybe, Robert, you have a perspective on what can we do as an industry to attract more young people to be part of our industry and be data scientists, not working for the politicians, but working to get more people into life insurance?
So it's a great question. I think, we have really interesting problems, and we need to emphasize what it is that we're doing and put it in the context of, ultimately, we have the opportunity to impact tens of millions of lives. We can do that through coverage by protecting people from risk, but also we can use the data that we collect to drive healthier behaviors. So we really are solving some of the most complex problems that any data scientist or statistician could dream of solving, or computer scientist. And it is predicting how long somebody's going to live. And what we're really focused on is how can we take the information that we have today, not even using alternative data, just using the data we have from the application and from not even medical, not even labs and exams, but just using the application data plus prescription histories plus medical billing records, driving histories to be able to predict how long somebody's going to live. One of the benefits of machine learning here is that we can become very granular with pricing. So because we're looking at multiple dimensions of the problem, we can stratify an existing population to a much greater extent, and we can offer much more granular pricing. And this is an exciting problem. How do you create more personalized insurance for individuals so that they're not just put into a risk bucket, but at the same time, how do you make sure that you're pricing appropriately so that you're still making money for the business? And that, again, leads to solving this big problem, which is a lot of people are uninsured because they think that they can't afford it. And there needs to be a way for us to drive down the cost in the industry, and automation is really, for us, that key. It's 50% of our cost for a policy is the acquisition and underwriting cost. If we can eliminate that or reduce it, we can actually offer much less expensive insurance. So when we go out and we talk to data scientists, we talk about, you're going to be building models, and you're going to be finding data that will help to predict mortality, that will help to predict longevity, it'll help to predict the development of specific health conditions. And that's another thing we're very focused on, is how likely is it that someone's going to develop diabetes or heart disease, and then recommend interventions. So these are really interesting, complex problems, and there's a very clear economic benefit for the industry in solving them. But also, you're solving a larger societal problem. You're trying to improve health outcomes. You're trying to provide protection for families. And this class of problems is very interesting for a lot of data scientists. A lot of data-driven people are curious, how do I solve this? I mean, people on my team are very, very excited about these types of problems. So I think just making it less about, insurance is a very old industry, but it's got a lot of exciting problems that are all of us experience. All of us, want to figure out how long we're going to live and what protection we need, and would like to be healthier and like to live as long as possible. And we can actually do something about that.
Yeah, so I think if we all do a better job at advocating what we're doing for the world, maybe we'll attract a few incremental more people to the industry. So the last segment I wanted to cover is really to talk about the alternative, right? This entire discussion today has been about AI, but if you think about from the context of longevity, there's other ways that we can look at it. Like Jolie had mentioned, alternative data. We also could think about wearables, Internet of Things types of devices that give us clues about what people will do based off of what they're doing every day. So I think, Jolie, I'll give you the opportunity to start on this. What is your perspective in terms of IoT versus AI? If we had the ability to have every policyholder be on Vitality or Optimity or one of these other wearable or kind of plugged into the phone technologies, is that going to allow us to know more about our book than if we're upfront studying people better?
Well, I think they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, because I think AI is the only way to deal with this explosion of data in something in a meaningful manner. But I also think that what is important is to think about what your purpose is for the use of AI. So we think about it in two frames. One is engagement. So how do we use data to then get the customer to engage more? You mentioned Vitality, so that's a really good example. Someone made the reference to me of how do you get a consumer to engage with a health and wellness platform? We all like different types of music, so you need to figure out what that individual DJ that really gets that engagement going work, and that's how you use AI, is to figure out what the individual, the consumer's DJ is from a health and wellness perspective, so they engage with it. it. Now, engagement is very different from risk assessment. Risk assessment, that's where we need longitudinal studies, or we need a lot of data in order to affirm the assumptions that we set. I'm not saying there's not a place for AI there, but that's where we have to be really careful how we incorporate that in it to have the good framework, because regulators will be questioning that. We see it already starting to happen.
Yeah, so we're pretty much at our last question, so we'll go around and really cover one key question, right? So for the carriers sitting in the audience, they're thinking about how are we going to do something about AI implementing in our business to really improve our prediction models. So I think, Fred, do you want to start and share what's one piece of advice in terms of using AI to improve longevity that those in the audience can think about?
I would say, invest as much as you can to rely more on EHRs and APSs and get the data out of there in an automated way. And feed, and again, you have to still have human in the loop. So I agree that we won't be able to kind of completely get rid of the underwriters, but there's still a lot to be done there in terms of transforming the data that's there and getting rid of the data input that we've been hearing about from previous panels and so on. So there's a lot AI can still do at this point. It's also, you get to split the problem down, right? Like, for example, wearables, all they allow you to do is go, for example, guaranteed issue product, simple issue product. They don't allow you to go all the way down to full underwriting. If the agent or the consumer wants to provide the lowest price possible, you have to eventually get to the full underwriting approach. And it's only by getting into the causal data, because the regulators now is not allowing us to use correlation. Correlation, which would have been the ultimate potential of AI, is really not allowed right now. It's becoming too controversial. Carriers could waste a lot of time just trying to get over that barrier. So if you want to do something now that is not going to be too controversial, you're going to have to focus on causation. Causation brings you to EHRs, APSs, and so on. So that's really, in my mind, in my opinion, where you should be putting your money.
Jolie?
I'll pass. I'll let you go ahead. I'm good with that. We're almost out of time.
I would recommend two things. So one, start collecting data in a way that you think 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future. Start collecting data, get your data architecture, get a sound data architecture. Then number two is don't be afraid to start experimenting. Start with MVPs and build solid business cases around them. AI has an incredible return on investment. So start experimenting with small use cases, building them and using them, even if it's not for something as large as longevity, but if it's a smaller problem, customer engagement, improving customer service, start building that muscle in your organization, get executives used to using AI and seeing the impact of AI and getting comfortable using AI models.
All right, well, that's a wrap. Thanks to all three of our panelists. And I'll pass it back to Roy.
All right, guys, from the last announcement, so sit tight real quick. That was a great panel. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. Summarize it. Don't be the opposite of AI. Think about that. All right, one guy's got it. All right, don't be real stupid. I got you. Okay. Hey, everybody has phones here, right? If you take out your phone, can you have a phone? Can you take out your phone? Can you? Come on, work with me. Come on, guys. You guys are tough. Why don't we go to InsurTechNewYork.com, check out our site, because you know what? We got more things coming. We got the Competing on Collaboration, March 29th. Check out, you can pre-register now on that site, as well as the digital distribution. So these are two events that are coming up. Check it out. Go to the site. I see one, maybe two people doing it. Oh, I see a couple people in the back. Catch on, people. Catch on. And then, hey, what's next? We're going to be networking right now for a little bit out here. Get some time to meet some others in the community. And then lastly, I just want to thank everyone for showing up, coming here and being part of the fun community. Thank our Tony and David for hosting a great another event, our panelists and our TED Talk speakers, and also our interns here to help us make this possible. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. Really appreciate your time.